Hello everyone, this is Andrew. Welcome to Keen on America.
On July 4th, 2026, America will be 250 years old, an anniversary that will, no doubt, be greeted with a mixture of celebration, contemplation, and resignation. In Keen on America, Andrew talks not just about the American past and present, but also speculates on its future. What, Andrew asks, will be the 21st century fate of this now venerable American republic?
Hello everybody. A few days ago, we had the president of Brandeis University on the show, Arthur Levine. His book, The Great Upheaval, talks about higher education's past, present, and uncertain future. He believes that the US is in the midst of a profound transformation, which hasn't really been seen since the Industrial Revolution, which is dramatically affecting universities and all other institutions. And he argues that the universities need to adapt like all other institutions. We didn't get to the issue of tenure. I should have asked him whether he thinks that the academic tenure system, which I think originated at the beginning of the 20th century, was appropriate in our new information age. But my guest today, Deepa Acevedo, has a new book out. It's called The War on Tenure, which is a defense of tenure. And she is a professor at Emory Law School. She's joining us from Atlanta. Deepa, congratulations on the new book. Do you have tenure?
I do have tenure. Thank you.
Well, congratulations on that.
Although I started working on this research before I had tenure, which gave me a kind of anticipatory PTSD.
Yeah, I can imagine. Before we get to the book, I'm sure you haven't had the opportunity to read Levine's book, The Great Upheaval, but do you agree that we're going through a profound transformation more broadly in social, cultural, economic terms that's equivalent to the Industrial Revolution of the 19th and 20th century and the early 21st century?
Well, I don't know about the explicit comparison point, the kind of quantification of the level of transformation that we're going through as compared to the Industrial Revolution. But I think it's unarguable that we're in a transition moment. To what? I don't know. I think that we see that particularly, in the educational context, we can see that in terms of the need to reconsider what the university is for, the attack on higher ed, the attacks on higher ed that we're seeing right now, the war on tenure, so to speak, that is something that is certainly particularly salient right now, but isn't limited to the current moment. So I think the reconsideration of what exactly the university as an institution, as what education more broadly is for, is certainly something that defines our current moment. It makes it stand out.
Yeah, and the title of your book, The War on Tenure, is strong language. Wars are violent, unpleasant things. Before we get to the war, let's talk about tenure itself. Can you explain what it is? Some people won't know. Other people might have got it a little bit wrong. What is your definition of what exactly academic tenure is?
Yeah, sure. So tenure belongs to the category of just cause contracts. And these are employment contracts that are unusually protective because they mean that you can't be fired without reasonable grounds. That's the just cause in the name, right? That matters a lot in America because the baseline rule for indefinite employment relationships, the kind of job that you get that doesn't have a specified duration, 2 years, 5 years, so on, that baseline rule is called employment at will. And it means you can be fired for good reason, bad reason, no reason at all. Your boss walks into work and says, it's Thursday, you're fired. That's okay. Your boss walks into work and says, you're wearing purple. I hate purple. You're fired. That's okay. So it is a big deal when someone has a just cause contract. because that means that you do need a reason for firing them. And tenure is a particularly protective form of just cause, because in addition to needing a rationale that has some basis in reason, and in addition to having to provide the employee who is potentially on the chopping block with some notice that they are in that precarious situation, or providing them with payment, like a severance payment in lieu of notice, tenure requires some due process, a hearing, a chance to respond, and it requires some peer participation, some role for other faculty. So tenure is a variety of a type of contract that is unusually protective in the United States. Lots of people have just cause contracts, and lots of people have just cause contracts that are almost as or equally protective as tenure, but that's what it is and why it matters so much.
Some people are going to be listening to this Deepa and thinking to themselves, particularly out here in Silicon Valley where I am, and think, this sounds ridiculously archaic. Why should anyone have tenure of any sort? If they're any good at their job, they'll be rewarded. If they're not, they'll have to leave. What is the core argument for tenure on the academic front?
So there is a traditional argument, which I don't disagree with. I just think that there are additional arguments that should be made and increasingly must be made if we're going to actually defend tenure. The traditional argument is that tenure makes possible academic freedom, right? I agree with that. I affirm that. I'm not saying that tenure has no role to play in defending academic freedom, that I don't think academic freedom is valuable, nothing of the sort. Tenure matters because it protects, or it is supposed to protect, scholars' ability to engage with and speak on topics that may cause offense, but ultimately advance our understanding of the world and of the human condition. It also protects scholars from internal consequences when they say or do things in the process of sharing governance over the university that the university administrators don't like. So that is the traditional reason for why we need tenure, and I'm not taking issue with it. I'm just saying we need to talk about other reasons that also matter and that sound in labor. So
before we get to the other reasons, what journalists don't have tenure. Podcasters don't have tenure. I certainly don't have tenure, although I don't have an employer either. There have been lots of controversial cases at newspapers recently of people being fired for saying one thing or other, particularly after the Charlie Kirk thing, which I'm sure we're going to talk about later. Why should academics have tenure? Journalists can go and work somewhere else. They can open their own Substack. They can
so you're
books.
giving me part of the answer, and it goes towards the labor dynamics. But an academic can't go and open their own university. You can be a public intellectual, you can be a scholar, you can teach people without an institutional affiliation, but you cannot be a professor without that, in the way that you can be a journalist or a commentator without a particular organization hiring you, right? So the institutional nature of academic employment means that there are differences that require some form of protection over labor processes, and that's what tenure goes to. But
I take your point, but if tenure was gotten rid of, and being a university teacher was like any other profession, and there was no tenure, then if you got thrown out of one university, you just go to another. In the same way as if you get thrown out of a newspaper, you go to another. If you get thrown out of working in a store, you go to another.
And how many of those potential jobs do you imagine there are? Let me give you a bit of a sketch. So when the year that I went on the entry-level job market for academic law positions, I looked across the country, because that's what you have to do. You have to be willing to move anywhere that is willing to hire you. I looked in the state of Georgia. Georgia, the entire state, has 5 ABA accredited law schools. Every law school has maybe 1 or 2 positions, faculty that it hires to teach the subjects that I teach in the legal universe, labor and employment law. So that means that there are probably between 5 to 10 chances in the state of Georgia to be a law professor who teaches labor and employment law. Now, many schools hire nobody in the tenure stream to teach labor and employment law. It's not a bar tested subject. It's not particularly prestigious. So you don't always have somebody on your permanent tenure stream faculty teaching these subjects, which means that probably there are 5 to 6 opportunities to be a labor and employment law professor in the state of Georgia. Many of those positions will be filled in a given year. They were all filled the year I went on the entry-level market. In the last 2 years, to my knowledge, one such position opened up in the entire state this year. The year that I moved to Emory, there was only one position in the entire state, and I got it. So you can't just pick up and move to another employer, partly because a dense job market in academia, the kind of thing that we see in a major metro area like Atlanta, like New York, like Chicago, like LA, means that there are between half a dozen to a dozen institutional employers available to you. But then the number of positions within those institutions that you might be eligible for drastically reduces because of the nature of specialization that is,
yeah,
at least
I
at
take
this
your
moment,
point on that.
inescapable.
But I mean, some people again might be listening and thinking, well, you don't have a right to a job. That simply reflects supply and demand. If
Of course, you don't have a right to a job,
hold
but
on,
you
let
know
me
the
finish.
reason.
If there are, I don't know, if there are 5 jobs per year or 1 job per year in Atlanta, in Georgia or elsewhere, there's no. I mean, maybe there are too many people on the market for this kind of labor.
There are certainly too many people on the market, but why on earth would anyone go through the intensely long, expensive, and difficult process that is required to even become eligible to go on the market if you could be dropped at the, even if you could lose your job at the drop of a hat in that way? And the response is, well, go move, pick up across the country and see if somebody else will have you. The reason tenure became an industry norm is not because faculty pushed for it. I mean, they did, but that's not why it happened. The reason tenure became an industry norm in the post-war era was because universities, as employers, realized that it was a valuable recruitment and retention device for people who have spent years training and could take their skills on the general labor market where they would earn more than they will in a university context.
So, but on the other hand, if Harvard Law School or Yale Law or Stanford Law called you up, you said you've got tenure, and they offered you significantly more money or a more attractive package, or allowed you to move closer to friends or family, that doesn't stop you giving up your tenure at Emory and taking it up at Harvard or Stanford, does it?
No, it doesn't.
So it protects. So where's the protection for the university on this?
The protection for the university, well, to begin with, there's a lopsidedness in any employment relationship that favors the employer. So the fiction that we have that an employment contract occurs between 2 equally sophisticated and resourced entities is just that. It's a fiction. The fact that a particular contractual setting or circumstance or tool like tenure might not be completely even in the way that it balances power relationships is simply responding to the fact that those parties in that relationship are not balanced in their respective power either. But I'll say this, the university gets some security simply by virtue of the fact that academia is functionally a quasi-monopsony as a market.
Yeah, and lots of people have strong opinions on this. I know as a undergraduate and graduate student, there are always examples of academics, and I'm sure you know this all too well, who have tenure and appear, maybe it's not true, but appear incredibly lazy. It appears as if they got tenure and then once they got it, they essentially retire. And I'm sure that this certainly isn't always true of people who get tenure, but isn't that one of the arguments against it? That it
is one of the arguments against it,
like laziness once you get tenure.
It is one of the arguments against it. And like most of the specific arguments that are made against tenure, it's based on assumption and stereotype more than any actual empirical fact. We have relatively little empirical information about how tenure actually affects productivity after it's awarded. But the studies that we do have show that tenure does not reduce productivity. There are some field-specific studies in sociology, computer science, law, that largely suggest that people who write a hell of a lot before they get tenure continue to write a hell of a lot after they get tenure. People who write just enough before tenure continue to write just enough after tenure. Tenure does not markedly change the productivity levels of the people who hold it because people are not classically economically inclined rational maximizers. The idea that you would stop working as intensively once you get an emailed PDF that says, congratulations, the board of trustees has decided that you are, worthy of tenure, and we are so excited to welcome you to the permanent community of the university, or something like that. The idea that somebody would stop working intensively because they receive that presupposes that the only reason you work is to get job security. The only reason academics work is to get the job security of tenure. And then once they get that, they act in a kind of supernaturally rational fashion and decide to stop working. That is simply not the case. And it's unfortunate that academics themselves, internal critics, in addition to the external critics we have kind of fueled this by drawing on like personal experience, which we all have, whether we're inside or outside the academy, of colleagues who do less than their fair share. The availability heuristic and the kind of cognitive failures of some of academia's internal critics do not mean that stereotype actually holds water.
You've done a lot of research for this book, The War on Tenure. What's the your sense, at least within university administrations, on the value or lack of value of tenure? Do you think, talking to a typical, as I said, I forgot to ask Arthur Levine, I should get him back on the show to ask him, but talking to a typical senior person at a university like Brandeis, do you think you'd find that they're sympathetic to the idea of tenure or not?
Well, I'm not quite high enough on the totem pole to talk to a lot of senior administrators, but the ones who I have spoken with understand that at the very least, because the university, as we still have constructed it, and maybe the forum needs to change, but as it exists, the university in America is premised on the idea of shared governance, that some decisions about what goes on, the curricula, the course requirements, the nature of teaching, all of these things, what makes for excellence in research, what makes for reasonable research expectations of upcoming faculty. These things require faculty input because many administrators, increasingly so, are not coming from purely or even strongly academic backgrounds. And even if they had, they have to be so fully involved in administrative duties that after a while, like everyone, you become more focused on the administrative side of things rather than knowing what is currently reasonable kind of field expectations. If faculty need to participate in the governance of the institution, then they need to have the security of knowing that they can participate in governance. And I think that a lot of university administrators still appreciate that, whether or not they fully appreciate the extent to which tenure helps provide, make the labor of ordinary academia possible.
There are lots of arguments against tenure, some made from within universities. The economist Stephen Levitt, for example, thinks it should be got rid of. Is there you're clearly in favor of tenure. That's entirely clear, Deepa. But are there any arguments against tenure that, in your mind at least, make some sense?
I think that there are arguments that make sense that say we need to reform the way that tenure is practiced. I do not think that there are arguments for abolishing tenure that have convinced me yet, because most of them are based on stereotype and caricature, including Levitt's. But I think that there are a lot of points that have been made about how tenure is practiced and how it is implemented that are fair game. Nothing is perfect. And certainly a system that is built, that is created, that has incentive effects can be changed and often requires adjustment. And I think we're in one of those moments now.
I mean, clearly the politics of this argument are self-evident. I mean, both the for and against politics. But I wonder whether one of the problems with tenure is it's unavoidably political. I had a historian on the show recently, a historian of the Soviet Union, who's written a number of histories which are perhaps a little bit more sympathetic to the Soviet Union than most traditional historiography. And he said to me that he was actually, I'm not going to mention his name or his university, but he was surprised that he actually got tenure because he felt that not his politics, but his presentation of the Soviet Union was controversial. Is that one of the dangers with tenure, that unavoidably, particularly in the humanities, that it gets politicized, that people think of people up for tenure, not in terms of their achievements, their intelligence, their ability with students or their commitment, but their politics, what they study, how they present their subject?
I think there's certainly scope for poor decision-making in academia, just as there's scope for that in all industries and workplaces. Tenure does not, or the possession of a doctorate, does not make you immune to natural human foibles, as, internal critics' caricatures of tenured faculty as being lazy clearly shows us. So the fact of being a professor, of being tenured, of sitting on someone else's tenure evaluation committee does not mean that your decision-making is going to be ideal in all circumstances or in any individual circumstance. But I don't agree with the suggestion that tenure is inherently politicized. I think academia, like most industries, most universities, most of the individuals in universities, like in most other workplaces, these people are genuinely trying to do a good job. Do they always live up to their own expectations or others? No. But I don't think that means the form itself, the structure of the relationship, is inescapably political.
So your book is called The War on Tenure. Now, sometimes authors don't choose titles, but I assume you're comfortable with that, otherwise you wouldn't have written it. Is there really, I mean, it's one thing to be critical of tenure. It's one thing for some aspects of tenure culture to be up for grabs, for being debated or reformed. Is there really a war? And what exactly is it? Who's fighting this war on tenure?
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, as I say in the book, the book is not about the war on tenure. That would be more of a history work. It's a response to the war on tenure. My goal is to provide a vocabulary and a conceptual framework for articulating that response. But I think my second goal was to nod to precisely what you're suggesting, which is that academia's problems, the attacks on academia that we're seeing right now, aren't naturally arising. These are things, we're talking about systems and rules and incentives and behaviors and like industry expectations. All of these things are created by people. A war is waged by people. It's not neutral or accidental. It's strategic, aggressive, and coordinated. What we're seeing right now in this current moment, particularly with a lot of the recent fallout after the Charlie Kirk social media comments, is an attack on higher ed. The defunding from the central government is an attack on higher ed. But the war, I think, began decades earlier with attacks on labor structures within academia. And that really is the war on tenure.
And who's fighting the war then? Who's coordinating these forces against tenure?
We can point to different sources or actors for different parts of this effort and at different moments in time. Again, this isn't what I focus on in the book because I'm interested in responding to the war and not documenting it. That's done relatively regularly by a lot of other commentators. But 10, 20 years ago, at the state level, we began seeing the earliest seeds of state level legislation that was meant to weaken, or in some cases, just outright dismantle tenure at public universities. I think that now we have seen at the federal political level an intentional effort to dismantle research through defunding efforts. We are seeing outside the political realm social action, coordinated action to attack higher ed more generally. With the Kirk assassination social media fallout, there have been coordinated efforts to watch professors, to track professors and their social media activities so that they can be persecuted essentially and hopefully terminated from their employment relationships. The war on tenure that is in this moment manifesting most acutely as an attack on higher ed, both in labor structures and in inherent goals, is something that is coming from a multitude of sources, political and social, over time at different levels and in different from different geographic and cultural constituencies.
Yeah, you recently wrote an interesting piece in Barron's about what the Charlie Kirk fallout reveals about professors' job security. And you talk about social media, and quoting you say, social media has transformed the world into a type of small town Connecticut. And that's true, not just of academics, but of all professions. Shouldn't academics, who people with PhDs generally tend, I think, to be reasonably smart, shouldn't they know that? And shouldn't they be careful on social media to make comments about highly sensitive subjects?
I think caution is certainly warranted. I myself am not on any social media. I never have been, and I hopefully never will be. But I think we need to remember again that the possession of a doctorate, while it does many things, it does not make you immune to bad decision making, nor should it be expected to. The second thing is that most people who are currently in tenure stream positions, or even who are in non-tenure stream faculty positions at universities, are not digital natives. They didn't grow up policing themselves and managing their worlds with social media. This is something that they've come to at the earliest in their high school or college years, right? And so this is an ongoing learning process that hopefully will speed up a lot, because as it is becoming clear, tenure is not the watertight protection that it is frequently represented as being, and that ideally it should be closer to approximating. It should be stronger than what it is right now. And since it's not, I think that we're going to see a lot of academics exercising considerably more caution and constraint in how they communicate with broader audiences.
And isn't that a good thing? I mean, we all need to offer constraint in not aggravating people and not saying outrageous things on social media platforms that will only incite more divisions and name calling and perhaps even violence. So that's not necessarily a bad thing, is it?
I think moderation and caution are not bad things, but I think that doing it for the wrong reasons can be a bad thing. Doing it out of fear is a bad thing. Doing it because you realize that anything you say will be taken in the most negative light possible is a bad thing. I think that speaks to the social moment that we're in more than it speaks to the individual who does it or the individuals who actually respond to it and use it to persecute the speaker. I also think it's worth keeping in mind that as there are more calls for academia to kind of show its value to broader society, universities and professional scholarly communities and individual academics are taking it on themselves to engage with the public more. This is because there have been so many critiques of the ivory tower of faculty cloistering themselves inside academia. And in response to that, academics are trying to get themselves out there a little bit more, put themselves out there a little bit more. And it is unfortunate and unfair, I think, that at the same time, putting yourself out there is considered valid grounds for termination, discipline, summary, adverse employment consequences, and hounding by a potentially limitless critical audience.
As a parent who's just put 2 kids through extremely expensive college, my problem isn't so much with tenured professors, it's with the whole system, with overpaid bureaucrats, overpaid academics, overpaid God knows who will work at these universities, whoever is charging the $80K a year for kids to go to a 4-year college. Is the war on tenure, or what you see at least as the war on tenure, is that part of a general public reaction against maybe the cost of universities, or the way in which universities are increasingly seen in a negative or a problematic way in society, outside the tenure argument, outside just academics, including university presidents, bureaucrats, everyone who's associated with this industry?
The cost of higher education is a real problem, and definitely part of the tensions and growing mistrust between higher ed and society. There's no 2 ways about it. I think I want to point out 2 things, though. First, the vast majority of academics, tenure streamed or not, are not bringing home big bucks. This was the first year that academic salaries did not lag behind inflation. Again, the many scholars, many professors across disciplines would earn more in industry outside academia than they earn at the university level. A lot of faculty at smaller, regional, less resourced institutions rely on the social safety net because they do not earn enough through their faculty appointment to be able to survive in what are often higher cost of living areas. So in a sense, just as we see in other industries, other sectors like retail and food service and leisure and so on, workers being underpaid by their employers and the cost of their life being shifted onto the taxpayer because those workers need to avail themselves of social safety nets, of welfare services. We are also seeing that in academia. So it is not the financially cushy position that it's often viewed as being. That said, I think that you are absolutely right to point out that there are concerns not only over the sheer dollar value of higher education now, but where that's going. And I'll be frank with you, faculty are asking these questions of their administrators as well. Where are all of these dollars going? Where are endowment dollars going? Where is the interest going? Where are the earnings going? Often they're going to a lot of new infrastructure. They're going to personnel and resource development that have nothing to do with the core mission of the university of teaching, of conducting research. But faculty do not possess as much information, let alone control over these things, as they would like and as you might think. The last thing I'll just say on this is that there's been some interesting number crunching work suggesting that poorer universities, the ones that have the best claim to be in a budgetary crisis and therefore are kind of seemingly most justified in switching off of stable long-term tenure stream employment into contingent adjunct labor of this type that is percolating throughout the economy and throughout the labor force, those poorer universities aren't the ones making the most extensive use of contingent academic labor. It's actually richer universities, ones that have substantial endowments, that have earnings, that have alumni revenue sources, that have what funding there is left to be had from public coffers. It's often richer universities, private universities, that are relying more on cheap contingent adjunct academic labor, which goes to your point, because it shows that they're just choosing to spend their dollars in ways other than supporting the core labor of academia, teaching and research through stable employment forms.
Yeah, it's the Uberification of academia, where
absolutely,
where everyone is paid per course, per hour, per student. It's very troubling. In your Charlie Kirk piece for Barron's, you talk about academics when they're fired. You say it's the end of the line. What happens to them? Do they have to go and live in their cars? Do they go and live at home? Do they have to rely on a spouse or a friend? What's your sense of the consequence of the loss of tenure?
All of the above. You'd be surprised. I've literally read stories of academics teaching adjunct classes while living in their cars.
Yeah, there have been some stories in the newspapers out here in the Bay Area of individuals like that.
Right. So when there is some literature on job mobility in academia and in general, we think, labor economists particularly think, that job mobility early on in your career is a good thing because it allows you to grow your wages. And then job mobility later on is less of a good thing, and it pays to stay where you are. Neither of those things is true in academia. Most of the time, when an academic has to exit stable employment, they're exiting not to another job, not because they're trading up, either in stature or in resources, but because they're exiting the industry altogether. And there's a growing cottage industry on consulting and advising these post-AC individuals or these alt-AC individuals. What do you do when you have been in school for 10 years and then you've been teaching or researching for another 5, 6, 10 years? It is very difficult to retool yourself, in part because the things that you must learn to do, the ways you have to learn to speak, to write, the skills that you develop in order to even have a chance of playing the game, of entering the academic market, let alone succeeding in it, are things that are actively not valued on the general labor market. And so you're essentially depreciating your own skill set, your own human capital,
right.
in order to try
a lot
and
of people
advance.
will say, well, that's true of every profession. In this profound transformation, Deepa, leaving aside the issue of tenure, clearly you're in favor of that. Is there a need, though, for other fundamental reforms of how, for example, most faculty train? I mean, I don't know what the average length of time it is to require to get a PhD. I think it's 6 or 7 years.
That used to be the standard. I talk about the 6-year standard in the book.
Well, what's the standard now?
On the very lowest end for some science and engineering fields, about 5.5 years is still possible. For social and behavioral sciences and non-science and engineering fields, generally speaking, 8 to 8.5 years is the average.
So it sounds absurd to be spending 8-10 years studying for something and then to enter this field, which is being Uberified, where everyone's losing their tenure, or tenure's going away, and you're being paid by the course or the hour or the semester. Does it suggest maybe that the PhD system, which came out of, I guess, 19th century Germany, that itself is archaic and it needs to be reformed?
I think we are at a moment where we need to really think about the things that the university does, for whom it does those things, and how we can best do them going forward. Absolutely. I I don't know that it is possible to simply wave a wand and reorganize graduate education, because some of the things that you need to learn how to do simply take time. There is no getting away from the fact that learning a language takes time, or that running experiments enough until you have sufficient findings takes time. And those are things that you need to learn to do in order to be able to teach other people how to do them, in order to be able to pursue work that relies on them. So there is an infinite possibility for reform and for kind of reducing the time to completion. But I think that there is room for adjustment and for reevaluation.
Well, finally, let's go back to our current situation. As I said, you wrote a piece for Barron's a week or two ago on what the Charlie Kirk fallout reveals about professors' job security. The Kirk assassination has created a degree, I think, of paranoia, both on the left and the right, but seems to be a feature of American culture and politics, is that something happens, everyone's paranoid, and then the next week something else happens, and everyone focuses on that. It's hard to tell, of course, hard to project the future, but is the Kirk fallout really significant in terms of the war on tenure? Do you think it will have long-term ramifications?
Yes. I think that there are both immediate and long-term ramifications. Let me put things into context for you. The estimates that I'm seeing floating around right now for how many professors and teachers have been fired as a result of the Kirk fallout ranges between 40 and 60. But that bundles a lot of different people together, right? Different types of instructors. So let's assume that 60 is the number and that just a quarter of those are tenured professors who have lost their job as a result of social media activity related to Kirk's assassination, right? My research shows that for the 20-year period between 2000 and 2020-21, only around 30 individuals who were tenured professors were terminated for cause and viewed their terminations, these are their own perspectives, viewed their terminations as being in violation of their speech and academic freedom rights. So if we kind of put all of this together, we're potentially at something like 10 to 15 tenured professors in a matter of a month who have lost their jobs as a result of the Kirk social media fallout. Maybe. I don't know if that's actually the number. I'm just playing off of estimates here. But if that's the case, we're already at half to a third of the number of people who viewed their terminations as being in violation of their academic freedom over a 20-year period. That means this moment is significant. And I think that what that means for the longer term is that academics are going to remember just how striking this particular moment was and what it taught them about the value of labor security and the potential for our currently existing systems to offer the security that they need.
Let's end, Deepa, on a personal note. You've done very well. As you said, you just got tenure at a very good university, Emory in Atlanta. And while I was researching this interview, I was looking at your CV, which is incredibly extensive. Long lists of article and book chapters you've written, works in progress, media publications, grants. My sense from friends who have had to get tenure is this is what you have to do to get tenure, for better or worse. You have to play the game. Clearly, it's worked for you. You're not against tenure, but do you think there's a danger of over-quantifying everything so that in order to get to the point where you have job security, you have to collect so many notches,
so many gold stars
that ultimately, firstly, it makes your life miserable because that's all you do, putting your CVs together, amassing all these articles and media appearances, some of which probably you wouldn't normally do. But has it made you, clearly you're happy with tenure, and clearly you'd have been very unhappy without it. But ultimately, has it made you a happier person? Does it make academics happier to be continually having to jump these hoops of tenure?
I think that what the lack of productivity decline before and after tenure shows us is that people who pursue this path, not just the ones who succeed on it, are intensely motivated by the work that they do. And could we all use a couple of lessons in work-life balance? Absolutely. But if there is ever a group of people who choose to pursue their work because they find it meaningful, and maybe that means they do it more than they should, and more than they need to achieve all of the markers that they want for themselves for perfectly rational employment security reasons, I think that's academics. Yeah, it has made me happy. I'm not trying to suggest that academia is perfect, that tenure as a practice is perfect, but I think that it has enough value, it makes enough sense, that it requires reform rather than the kind of attack and abolition that we've been seeing. And I wouldn't be doing that if I didn't find it valuable myself.
Well, there you have it. Very interesting and important new book by Deepa Acevedo from Emory University, The War on Tenure, very articulate defense, both in person, on print. Deepa, congratulations on the book. And I will look forward to hearing more about you on the politics of the campus, because it's going to be one of the main issues over the next few years. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrew. Really a pleasure.